Look at us. Look at us. We're smiling. What are you smiling at? Who would have thought, right? Who would have thought? Being happy after a Formula One race and genuinely having an exciting, unpredictable event. We got the Singapore Grand Prix. Let's talk about the weekend, the qualifying, the race, and my thoughts on the matter. So we're in Singapore, and we have one of the slowest tracks on the Formula One calendar, a track that's known for a very slow, twisty kind of vibe to it, and a very tight vibe where the walls can be problematic, the curbs can be problematic, and it's known for quite an extended history of quite a few yellows throughout its time in Formula One, and causing the races to go to the time limit, which I believe is 2 hours. And so they have had a lot of issues in the past with yellows. And so what we can see from this event is maybe looking at a lot of people getting into the wall. It's tight, it's slow, and a lot of traffic may cause some issues with that. High heat in Singapore, humidity, especially when you have a lot of yellows, the guys are in the cars longer, and so anticipate a very strenuous, very difficult track for the drivers to try to navigate here in Singapore. But let's get into qualifying and the unpredictable nature of that event this weekend. And so I'm going to generally just summarize it here. Before qualifying even starts, Max has some issues in the pits, is unable to kind of get going out of the pits. Everybody's like, what is going on? Why is the world champion Max Verstappen not getting into Q1 to get racing? And they ended up getting it figured out, but it was kind of a weird start to the qualifying session. And then we have Stroll that has this really massive crash. And one of my probably the biggest crashes I've seen in a Formula One race, because I've only been watching this past year, and that was pretty scary. I think the car held up decently. There wasn't too much like flipping and all that, but I'm glad he walked away okay, and that was honestly a miracle. Perez spins in Q2, and thus also Max struggles to have some grip as well in Q2, and they really just don't look all that great. And what ends up happening is they're both kind of on the bubble to get out of that session, and because of their lack of grip, they end up getting bumped out and don't even make it to the next session. Both Red Bulls get bumped out, and Liam Lawson ends up doing the final blow to Max Verstappen, and that was a pretty, I guess, an accomplishment for him. And so he was all over social media, which must have been cool. But both seemingly just struggling to really find it this weekend. And it's going to be a long weekend when the Haas's are looking much better than your cars are doing. So we'll see how that translates to the race. But both Max and Sergio aren't able to make it through. And the Ferraris look dominant. Mercedes looks good as well. And really, Ferraris were trading places momentarily. Mercedes kind of gets in there in between them a little bit. Russell gets in there, and it looks like we'll see a Sainz, Russell, Leclerc 1, 2, 3. And before the race even starts, I really was just wondering, okay, this is known for having a lot of yellows. Both of the Red Bulls are starting further back in the grid. It's likely they may run into some issues, other people crashing into them hitting curbs, them trying to push a little bit too hard. We've seen them come from the back or middle of the grid before and win races and get on the podium, but I think this situation is a little different. They seem awkwardly slow, and Ferrari and Mercedes look amazing, and a lot of other cars look better than they have, and that margin that normally Red Bull has, just don't have it this weekend. And so my question is, are they going to be able to safely work their way to the front? And then are the Haas's going to maintain that pace? And then really, who's going to end up coming up on top with the Ferraris and the Mercedes? Because I think we're going to have a duel that is reminiscent of past years with Mercedes and Ferrari. On the start of the race, really, man, this is a tight track, and we're lucky we didn't have anything crazier that happened, but it was pretty clean on the start. Ferrari ends up getting the 1-2 punch in that first couple corners, and we see Hamilton kind of just shoot across and cut the corner, and they're like, yeah, man, you gotta give that position back up, and so he gives that spot back up to Lando. And then we see Yuki Tsunoda have an early exit in this race as he gets into the back of somebody, and unfortunately that ends his race. We kind of settle in for next 10, 15, 20 or so laps, and we see Sargent kind of just go right into the wall, not like super hard or anything, but it feel like he couldn't maybe make that turn and kind of overshot the angle a little bit. Didn't make the apex, ended up getting into the wall, and that caused the yellow. And this is where things start to diverge off a little bit, because we see a lot of strategy calls here that end up determining people's races. And so this is about lap 21, and Max and Perez Red Bull decides to stay out. Everybody else dives into the pits, and they stay out. And so they end up getting to the top of the grid. However, it comes at a cost of maybe not being as fresh, having to try to make the stint last super long. And so they're not going to be able to maybe defend and be as racy as they need to be to stay up there. And so, we'll talk about this as we keep going forward. But in this pit sequence, Alonso also overshoots, exceeds track limits in a way. He's trying to get into the pits, and he overshoots it. Talk about that when we get to the results. But so after all said and done, you see the Red Bulls up in the front, but really they didn't pit. And so Russell and Norris tag team Max, and Russell ends up getting him. So we really start to see Max fall, right? I said that they're going to have to make these stints longer. They really aren't even defending. Lando ends up getting Max in the next lap, and so you see them both kind of get by Verstappen there. And then Hamilton passes Max on lap 27, and so just kind of see he's ticking downward. Max is just trying to extend the stint. No defense is given. Alonso tries to get by Perez. Ocon goes along the outside and gets Alonso. This was like a really super racy moment. It was really cool. We had 3 cars kind of going like this, and then Ocon comes from the outside. It was super cool, and Alonso doesn't end up getting the position, but I believe Ocon did, and that was around lap 37 in this kind of mid-racy section of the race. And really, you look down in the middle part of this race, and you see Max ends up falling all the way down to 15th, and Perez all the way down to 17th after all said and done. And so I think they really made the wrong call with this sequencing in the pits, and it ends up burning them here. I don't know if they had the pace this weekend anyway, and we'll talk about how they finished the race, but it doesn't really look good. At this point in the race, you're like mid-race, you're like, what were they doing? Then Ocon, after having a pretty decent race thus far, ends up hitting the curb, and we'll see this trend throughout the race where the curbs are like super dangerous, man. It's like Mario Kart out there. Bump a curb, you're flipping upside down and stuff, but hits the curb, his race is done. Has maybe like a clutch issue, and that's around lap 43, and that throws a yellow. And again, now we see some strategy diverging, okay? And so some people decide to pit and some people don't. And notably, we see Mercedes and Aston Martin come in and kind of get fresh rubber. They do lose track position. However, they know they have a promising car, and I think this decision ends up helping them as we get to this final part of the race. But let's get into this final 15 laps here and see how we finish out. So final 15 laps, we'll call it the final 15 here. A lot of craziness. People are really close together, and I really don't know what's going to happen and how this is going to finish out. And so Max is working his way up, gets up to 10th. As I mentioned, he was in 14th not too many laps prior. Mercedes gets its first look at the Ferraris since pretty much the beginning of the race, and they ended up making that pit decision as we just discussed, and I think them having the fresh rubber helped them out a little bit in this instance, and they're able to easily get past Leclerc, Lewis, and Russell both on lap 53 and 54. They execute that pass, and really the question is, okay, are they going to be able to catch Norris, and are they going to be able to catch Sainz? Time-wise, they're not too far apart, but do they have the pace to do so? Verstappen continues to climb, gets Gasly on lap 58 rather, and at this point we only have a few more laps left of the race, and people are still super racy, which is awesome, right? And with 3 laps left to go, Mercedes try to tag up and get Norris. It's like a 2v1 kind of thing. Sparks are flying everywhere. Norris is going down the straight, defends really well, elbows out, and ends up holding the position. And that was really admirable there. And that fight kind of ended there. But last lap, and we really see all 4 cars in the same shot, in the same camera angle. Boom, 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 boom. all 4 of them. And so I was like, oh my gosh, who's going to finish this race? We see Sainz, we see Norris, we see the Mercedes. Are they going to be able to finish? Are they not? The Mercedes are pushing super, super hard to try to get both their cars onto the podium. And really, we haven't seen this like throughout the year very much at all. Last lap, all this raciness going on. And it's racing. It's super exciting, right? And so George Russell is pushing so hard, he hits the curb close to the wall, bumps up, and ends up ending his race on the last lap. And he was so shaken up, and I felt really bad for George. He was doing such a great job. This is a good opportunity for him this weekend, and he ends up not being able to finish the race. And so there is a yellow that flies on that last lap, and we end up finishing out. But let's just briefly talk about the results of the race, where everybody finished out, and then I'll talk about my thoughts. So let's get into the results. So we see Carlos Sainz get his 2nd win of his Formula One career, and he ended up getting 2 poles in a row the past 2 races, and so that's really good for him. He's trending upward, and then Lando's able to stick that 2nd place win, and really Piastri just didn't have it this weekend. We saw how he didn't make it out of Q1, and so you wonder what the discrepancy is there between the 2 cars. You see Lewis Hamilton in 3rd. Where's George Russell? He DNF'd, unfortunately. Leclerc sticking 4th. Max getting all the way up to 5th, and I think that's admirable with the kind of ride he had with the poor, I don't know if I could say poor, but with the awkward strategy decision. Making a 5th could have been a lot worse. And Pierre Gasly getting 6th. Perez in 8th. Oscar in 7th. Liam Lawson 9th, getting some points, and really, when I look at Liam Lawson, man, I feel like he's been doing better than De Vries, better than Ricciardo, getting points for his team, and that's super awesome. Magnussen ending up getting points for Haas. Both Haas's were up there in the first top 10 to start the race, and so I'm sure that they hoped that they could both get points this weekend, but no dice there. Alex Albon 11th. Really didn't hear much from him this weekend as we have in prior weeks. Zhao getting 12th, Hülkenberg 13th, Sargent 14th. Despite running into the wall, he's able to kind of salvage it there. Fernando Alonso working his way down to 15th. And following Alonso, we have the people that did not finish the race. Unfortunately, George Russell, Valtteri Bottas, Esteban Ocon, Yuki Tsunoda, and Lance Stroll to round out the 20 drivers. But what are my thoughts on the race? I really look back to the beginning of the year since I've had this feeling about Formula One. That first race of the season, I had never really watched a Formula One race before. I genuinely had no idea how it was going to finish. And it was really cool to see Alonso fighting up there, and it was a beautiful race, and it was awesome. And for me, that was probably the best race I had watched since then. Singapore was. And it was more so just because I genuinely didn't know who was going to really finish out, and anything could have really happened. And though Sainz led the whole race and they were very dominant this weekend, I still felt like fresh and new, and it really got really hard and stale the past several weeks in Formula One. And I feel like for the better of the sport, this weekend had to happen. And I'm glad it happened when it did, and it wasn't several weeks down the line, because we still have a decent chunk left in the season. And I feel like with some of this momentum, some of these teams can continue to make these efforts for these next several races to come. And so I'm looking forward to that, and really I'm interested to hear and do some research on maybe why Max and Perez were so much worse here than they have been at prior tracks. If there's any issue there, if it was something with the engineering or whatever it might have been, I need to do some research on that. But if you guys, what did you guys enjoy about the race? What was your favorite moment of the race? And thank you guys for watching. Please like and subscribe if you want to see more motorsports content from the Rhino Racing channel. And as always, have a great week. Peace.